Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're exploring a really intriguing idea, what true renunciation and detachment actually mean. And for this, we're going to look at the 17th verse of the Bhaja Govindam, an ancient Sanskrit text.
By the philosopher Adi Shankaracharya.
Exactly. Now get this. This verse uses this image of an ascetic, someone who seems to have given up like literally everything.
Right.
But there's a twist, and it's going to make us really rethink what it means to be truly free from desires.
Yeah, you know what's so clever about this verse is that it challenges our assumptions about like what renunciation really is.
Yeah.
So it describes this ascetic. Okay, picture this guy. He's got just a fire for warmth, sun on his back, sleeping under a tree at night, surviving only on like whatever people offer him.
You'd think, wow, that guy's like reached ultimate detachment.
Yeah, you would, right. But that's where Shankaracharya throws in this curveball.
Okay, so he looks the part, but the verse says he's still clinging to something. It can't be possessions, though. I mean, the guy has nothing. So what's this deeper meaning here?
This is where it gets really interesting. Because in Vedanta philosophy, the word asha, which means desire, it isn't just about wanting like material stuff. It goes so much deeper than that.
Okay, so it's not just about, wanting a fancy car or a bigger house.
No, it's much more subtle. It
Yeah.
can be like craving recognition, or wanting to puff yourself up with spiritual pride, or even like desperately wanting to be liberated.
So you're saying even someone who looks like they've conquered material desires might still be totally tangled up in these subtler ones.
Exactly. It's like thinking you're free, but there's this invisible chain still holding you back.
Yeah, like you think you've cut the strings, but there's this hidden like trap door or something.
Well, the verse actually uses this powerful metaphor to illustrate this idea. It talks about the pasha, which means noose, the noose of desire.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going.
Imagine it like this. You think you've cut all those strings of attachment, but there's this hidden noose that's still tightening around you.
That's kind of creepy.
But that's the insidious nature of desire. It can be so deeply ingrained that even when we try to break free, we're often still caught in its grip.
This is reminding me of something I've been struggling with lately. I keep thinking if I just like declutter my apartment, get rid of all this excess stuff, I'll somehow feel more peaceful. But what you're saying is true detachment isn't about what you have. It's more about what you're clinging to.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's about those mental and emotional attachments.
Shankaracharya was way ahead of his time on this one.
Absolutely. He knew that true liberation isn't about external renunciation. It's about this inner shift.
So you can give away all your possessions,
Yeah.
but if you're still holding on to those desires, you're not truly free.
You're still bound.
So if it's not about giving things up, what does this internal shift actually involve? What's the goal here?
The ultimate aim, according to Vedanta, is self-realization,
Self-realization.
which means recognizing your true nature as Brahman,
Brahman.
which is like this infinite consciousness. It means you're already complete, whole, lacking nothing.
I mean, I get it. But that sounds kind of abstract.
Yeah, it's a big concept. Think about it this way. Imagine you're like desperately searching for this precious jewel. You spend your whole life looking everywhere, but it's exhausting, and you never find it. Then one day you realize you've been wearing the jewel all along. It was within you the whole time.
Okay, I kind of see what you mean.
Self-realization is like that. It's this discovery that everything you've been seeking is already present within you. And when you experience this profound connection to your true nature, the grip of desire naturally loosens. You stop desperately searching because you found the ultimate treasure.
That makes a lot more sense. But how do we even begin to move towards that? It's not like we can just snap our fingers and suddenly be self-realized, especially for those of us who aren't, ascetics living in the forest. What can we actually do in our everyday lives?
Well, the Bhaja Govindam points to 4 key paths.
Yeah.
Self-inquiry, meditation, discrimination, and surrender. And don't worry, you don't need to move into a cave to practice these.
Okay, so first up, self-inquiry. What does that even mean? Is it just like staring in the mirror and asking myself deep questions?
It could be as simple as that sometimes. But seriously, self-inquiry is the practice of constantly questioning, who am I?
Who am I?
It's like peeling back the layers of your identity.
Yeah.
Beyond your job title, your relationships, even your thoughts and feelings. Keep digging until you get to the core of your being.
Like an archaeological dig. But instead of ancient ruins, we're excavating the depths of our own consciousness. What do you think about that, listener? Have you ever had those moments of introspection where you really tried to get to the heart of who you are beyond the roles you play and the labels you wear.
And that's just the beginning. We've got 3 more paths to explore. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Bhaja Govindam. We're talking about desire, detachment, and these 4 paths to inner freedom. But I want to be clear, this isn't about becoming some emotionless robot, right? We're not trying to suppress all our feelings.
Oh, absolutely not. True detachment isn't about denying our emotions. It's more about transforming our relationship with them, especially with desire. There's this great analogy. You can't prevent birds from flying over your head, but you can prevent them from building a nest in your hair.
I like that.
Yeah.
So we're not trying to stop desires from popping up altogether,
Oh, right.
but we're learning to not let them completely take over.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that desires are going to arise, but we have the power to choose how we respond to them.
We don't have to be at their mercy, constantly reacting impulsively.
Right.
It's about creating that space,
Yeah.
that awareness, so we can make conscious choices rather than just being swept away by every fleeting desire.
Precisely. And that's where those 4 paths come in.
Yeah.
Self-inquiry, meditation, discrimination, and surrender. They're like tools to help us cultivate that inner freedom.
Okay, so we talked about self-inquiry in the last part. Can you give us a real-world example of how that might play out? Absolutely. Maybe you're stuck in traffic, feeling that familiar surge of frustration. Instead of letting that anger take over, you can pause and ask yourself, why am I so upset right now? What thoughts are fueling this anger?
So we're basically using self-inquiry to investigate our own reactions, become more aware of what's happening beneath the surface.
Exactly, and that awareness is key. Once you understand the root of your reaction, you can choose a more skillful response. Maybe you take a few deep breaths, listen to some calming music, or simply acknowledge the frustration without letting it ruin your day.
That's a great example. Now, what about meditation? I think a lot of people have this misconception that you have to be sitting cross-legged on a mountaintop to meditate.
You're right. But meditation could be so much more accessible than that. It can be as simple as taking 5 minutes to focus on your breath while you're on the train, or bringing your full attention to the sensation of your feet on the ground as you walk. It's about finding those pockets of stillness and presence throughout your day, even amidst the chaos.
So it's not about escaping reality. It's about bringing a more mindful presence to whatever you're doing.
Exactly. And as you practice self-inquiry and meditation, you start to naturally develop that 3rd path, discrimination.
You mean that ability to tell the difference between what truly matters and what's just a fleeting distraction? Like, I'm thinking about how easy it is to get caught up in wanting the latest gadget or chasing social media likes. But do those things really bring lasting happiness?
You're hitting the nail on the head. Discrimination is about developing that inner wisdom to spot those traps, to see what truly nourishes your soul versus what just offers a temporary distraction.
So it's about learning to prioritize what truly matters and letting go of chasing after those fleeting desires that ultimately leave us feeling empty.
Precisely. And that brings us to the 4th path, surrender. This one can be a bit tricky because it's often misunderstood.
Yeah, surrender sometimes sounds like giving up or becoming passive, but I get the feeling that's not what it's about.
You're right. Surrender in this context is about letting go of that constant need to control everything, to force outcomes, to make things happen according to your limited ego's plan.
So it's about recognizing that sometimes the best course of action is to step back, trust the process, and allow life to unfold as it's meant to.
And that can be incredibly challenging, especially in a culture that often glorifies hustle and control. But it's in that surrender that we often find the greatest peace and liberation.
It's almost paradoxical, isn't it? We let go of control, and yet we gain a deeper sense of freedom.
It is indeed a paradox, but it's a paradox that's at the heart of many spiritual traditions. Think about it. When we cling tightly to our desires, to our need for things to be a certain way, we create suffering for ourselves. But when we loosen our grip, when we allow things to be as they are, we open ourselves up to a deeper sense of peace and acceptance.
It reminds me of that saying, what you resist persists.
Exactly. And that's why surrender is so essential. It's about releasing that resistance, that struggle against the natural flow of life.
So it seems like these 4 paths are all interconnected, working together to help us cultivate that inner freedom.
Absolutely. They're like different facets of the same jewel, each reflecting and enhancing the others. And when we cultivate that inner freedom, it doesn't just benefit us individually, it ripples outwards, influencing our relationships, our work, and our impact on the world around us.
So it's not about isolating ourselves from the world, but rather about engaging with it from a place of greater clarity, compassion, and wisdom.
Exactly. And, we've been talking a lot about this ascetic in the verse, but what's striking is that even though he's outwardly renounced everything, he's still missing something crucial.
You mean that inner detachment. So is there a danger in focusing too much on external practices, like giving things up, or performing rituals, without cultivating that inner shift?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes. There can absolutely be a danger in mistaking outward appearances for genuine spiritual progress. Think of it this way. You can dress up in a fancy costume, but that doesn't change who you are on the inside.
So just going through the motions, performing rituals, or adopting certain lifestyle choices without addressing the underlying attachments won't lead to true liberation.
Right. It can even become a trap, a way of feeding the ego's desire for recognition or spiritual superiority. It's like wearing a mask of spirituality without actually doing the inner work.
It's like saying, look at me, I'm so spiritual because I don't own a TV. But if you're still clinging to judgment and self-righteousness, have you really achieved anything?
Exactly. That's why Shankaracharya emphasizes self-inquiry so much. It's about constantly checking our motivations and making sure our actions are aligned with our inner state.
So it's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. Our outward practices should be a reflection of our inner transformation, not a substitute for it.
Precisely. And this is a lifelong journey. It's not about achieving some static state of perfection, but rather about embracing the ongoing process of growth and self-discovery.
I love that. So it's not about reaching some final destination, but
Right.
about enjoying the journey itself. And it's a journey that's available to all of us, whether we're living as ascetics or navigating the complexities of modern life.
Absolutely. We all have the capacity to cultivate inner freedom. And the more we do that, the more benefits, not just ourselves, but also the world around us. We become more compassionate, more understanding, and more able to contribute to a more peaceful and harmonious society.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I'm feeling inspired to really put these teachings into practice. What about you, listener? What's resonating with you most from this deep dive so far?
And what are some practical steps you can take to bring a little more detachment and inner freedom into your own life? We'll be back after a short break to explore some more ideas.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring some pretty profound ideas about desire, detachment, inner freedom. But I think it's time to bring things down to earth a little and talk about, how we can actually apply these ancient teachings to our modern everyday lives.
Yeah, I agree. Because let's be honest, most of us aren't about to renounce all our possessions and head off to a life of solitude in the Himalayas.
Right. So how do we find that balance? How do we cultivate inner detachment while still living and engaging in the world with all its temptations and distractions?
Well, it starts with understanding that true detachment isn't about deprivation. It's not about forcing yourself to give up things you enjoy or living a life of austerity. It's more about shifting your perspective, changing your relationship with desire.
So it's not about saying no to everything, but about being more mindful about what we're saying yes to.
Exactly. It's about pausing before you act and asking yourself, is this desire truly serving me? Is it leading me towards a life that's aligned with my values, towards greater peace, joy, and fulfillment? Or is it just a temporary distraction, a fleeting pleasure that will ultimately leave me feeling empty?
That's a really helpful way to frame it. So instead of mindlessly following every impulse or getting swept away by every advertisement, we take a moment to check in with ourselves and make a more conscious choice.
Precisely. And that active conscious choice, that discernment, is where your power lies.
So it's like we become the CEO of our own desires rather than letting them run the show.
I love that analogy. And, the more you practice this, the more you'll start to notice a shift. Those desires that aren't truly serving you will gradually lose their grip. You'll experience a greater sense of inner freedom and peace, even amidst the chaos of daily life.
It's almost like creating a buffer zone between yourself and your desires. So you're no longer constantly reacting to them. You have more space to breathe, to respond with wisdom and clarity.
Exactly. And that space, that freedom, allows you to show up in the world in a more authentic, joyful, and compassionate way. You're not so caught up in your own needs and wants that you lose sight of the bigger picture.
This is really making me think about my own life, about the areas where I might be clinging a little too tightly. Maybe it's my attachment to a certain outcome at work, or my desire for approval from others, or even just my habit of scrolling through social media for hours.
We all have our areas of attachment, those things we cling to for a sense of security or validation. But remember, true freedom comes from letting go, from recognizing that our happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances or other people's opinions.
It's about finding that sense of peace and contentment within ourselves, regardless of what's happening around us, which brings us back to that idea of self-realization, right? It's about connecting with our true nature, that part of us that's already whole and complete.
Exactly. And the beautiful thing is that journey of self-discovery and the inner transformation is available to everyone, no matter where you are in life. It's not about reaching some perfect state of enlightenment, but rather about taking those small steps each day to cultivate greater awareness, compassion, and freedom.
So it's a journey, not a destination. And it sounds like it's a journey worth taking. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a question to ponder. What's one area of your life where you could practice a little more detachment? What's one desire you could loosen your grip on just a little bit? See what happens.
It might feel a little scary at first, like stepping into the unknown. But remember, true freedom lies on the other side of fear.
And who knows, maybe by letting go, you'll discover a sense of peace and joy you never knew was possible. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring. Until next time, keep those minds open, those hearts curious, and keep exploring those depths within yourselves.